For nearly half a century, the entire planet was caught in the middle of a massive rivalry between two superpowers. It was a conflict that defined generations, redrew the map of the world, and pushed all of humanity right to the edge of total annihilation. And the craziest part? The two main enemies never actually fired a shot at each other directly. It was a war of spies, a war of ideas, a war fought in the shadows. So let's dive in and try to make sense of it all.
And that's the central question, isn't it? It's this huge paradox. How can a war with no direct fighting still be one of the most dangerous periods in all of human history? How did a cold standoff bring the world so close to a nuclear boiling point?
At its core, the Cold War wasn't really fought on a battlefield. It was a battle for influence, a clash of ideas. Think of it like a global chess match. The two big players, the US and the USSR, weren't fighting head-to-head. Instead, they used other countries as their chess pieces in what we call proxy wars. They fought through espionage, and they poured everything they had into outdoing each other in technology and military might.
To really get this conflict, you first gotta know the players. When the dust from World War II finally settled, two major powers were left standing, ready to shape the future of the globe: the United States and the Soviet Union. And these two sides could not have been more different. They were like night and day. On one side, you had the United States and its NATO allies, all about capitalism, democracy, and a market economy. On the other side, you had the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact allies, pushing communism, one-party rule, and a state-controlled economy. This wasn't just some political squabble, it was a battle over two completely opposite ways of life.
So if these two superpowers never went to war directly, where did all the fighting happen? Well, it happened everywhere. It happened in the jungles of Asia, in the race to conquer outer space, and in the absolutely terrifying buildup of nuclear weapons. The entire planet became the board for their dangerous game. The most violent parts of the Cold War were these proxy wars. In places like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, the US and the USSR basically picked a side and poured in money, weapons, and support. For the millions of people who lived there, believe me, this war wasn't cold at all. It was incredibly hot, real, and devastating. But the arena that kept everyone up at night was the arms race. By the 1980s, these two countries had built up a combined arsenal of over 60,000 nuclear warheads. That's a number so huge, it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around what that much destructive power looks like.
This led to one of the most chilling ideas in human history: mutually assured destruction. And the acronym? MAD. It's perfect, right? Because it was completely insane. The idea was that the only thing preventing a nuclear war was the absolute certainty that if one side launched its missiles, the other side would launch theirs, and everybody would be destroyed. In a strange, terrifying way, the very weapons that could end humanity were the only things keeping the peace.
The rivalry wasn't just limited to Earth either. It went all the way to the stars. The space race was this huge battle for bragging rights. The Soviets got off to a blistering start, shocking the world by launching Sputnik, the first satellite, and then putting the first person into space. But the US set its sights on the ultimate prize, landing on the moon. And in 1969, they did it, a move that many saw as the checkmate in the race.
Now, even with this whole mad theory, the world came dangerously, terrifyingly close to nuclear war. It happened in October of 1962. For 13 days, the fate of the entire world hung by a thread. We now call it the Cuban Missile Crisis. So here's how it went down. The Soviets secretly moved nuclear missiles into Cuba, which is just a stone's throw from Florida. The US found out and immediately set up a naval blockade, basically surrounding the island. And just like that, the two superpowers were eyeball to eyeball, daring each other to blink. For 13 days, everyone just held their breath. The crisis finally ended with a secret deal. The Soviets pulled their missiles out of Cuba, and in return, the US promised not to invade and quietly removed its own missiles from Turkey.
You know, almost blowing up the entire planet has a funny way of making you rethink your strategy. The sheer terror of the Cuban Missile Crisis was a huge wake-up call for both sides. They realized they needed to find a better way to handle their rivalry, and this led to a new period of trying to cool things down, known as détente.
That near disaster actually led to some real progress. They started with a treaty to ban nuclear testing in the atmosphere. Then came the SALT treaties, which put a cap on the number of missiles each side could have. And eventually, they signed the START treaty, which began to actually reduce their nuclear arsenals. Slowly but surely, talking was starting to replace threatening.
But that uneasy peace wasn't the final chapter. By the late 1980s, one of the two giants, the Soviet Union, was starting to seriously crumble from the inside out, setting the stage for a dramatic end to the Cold War.
So what happened? Well, it wasn't just one thing. Decades of spending insane amounts of money on the military had crippled the Soviet economy. Their leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, tried to save it with these radical reforms: glasnost, which meant more openness, and perestroika, which was a restructuring of the economy. But here's the thing. Once you give people a little bit of freedom, they want more. His reforms opened the floodgates, and a wave of change swept across Eastern Europe that he just couldn't stop.
And then came the moment, the one that, for so many people, signaled the end of an era, November 9th, 1989. The Berlin Wall, the most powerful symbol of a divided world, came down. Not because of an army, but because of ordinary people. Crowds just flooded through. The Iron Curtain that had split Europe for decades was being torn to pieces on live TV. It was unbelievable. A couple of years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union itself officially collapsed. The 44-year standoff was over. But the question then became, what kind of world was left behind? Its legacy was huge, and it completely reshaped the globe. Suddenly, the United States was the world's only superpower. All the former Soviet countries started on the long, difficult road to creating their own economies. But the end of one conflict also planted the seeds for new ones. As NATO expanded eastward, it created new tensions with Russia that we're still dealing with today. There's no doubt about it, the echoes of the Cold War are still all around us. And that brings us to one last thought. The Cold War as we knew it, that specific ideological fight, is over. But when you look at the world today, with all the rising geopolitical tensions and new global rivalries, you have to ask yourself, did the Cold War really end, or did it just change its shape?